Thank you. I would like to present three projects today, none of which are in the city of Dhaka or any of the cities in Bangladesh. But first, to give you a perspective of what it is like in terms of population. And as you can see, Geneva would be the 11th largest city in Bangladesh. And in terms of size, that's what it is, Bangladesh and Switzerland. But what is that that dark patch over there? This would be the area needed to accommodate all the population of Switzerland in that part of the world, in terms of the densities that we experience in Bangladesh. The first project is in a very similar location to what Jalal was showing. It's a raised settlements project we did between from 2005 onwards. I'll not go into the locations you have heard, but our project is basically somewhere here as the river Brahmaputra, which comes in from Tibet and moves and then flows into the Bay of Bengal. This is a map of Bangladesh showing the 700 rivers and canals that it has, and it's like a vein, of course. It's a map of the vein of the country. The river looks like this. It's about 10 kilometers wide, but during non-rainy or non-flooded situation, it really looks like this because of the sandbanks that form in the river itself. And our project had to deal with the people who lived in these areas, in these remote areas, and for their protection from the floods. This is what the river looks like. So it comes down from the mighty Himalayas and then moves ever so slowly as it reaches the delta, which is very flat, of course. And then the people who are living there are there because they're landless, and they continue to live even during floods because they don't have formal title to their land or registration documents. And what happens is the sandbanks form as the sort of water slows down after it comes down from the mountains. And sandbanks form, and it continues every year until it becomes a kind of a landform. But these are shifting lands. This can break away, as you've seen in one of the videos. But the people do continue to live. They do not leave the place. And our project was to, instead of trying to build anything, was trying to sort of raise, instead of single houses, an entire village. So if this would be the flood level, try to sort of build something. It's like a raised kind of a settlement. It's a raised plinth, if you will. And in the middle, because to raise all this earth, we we dig a kind of a pond in the center, which could hold water for use during flood, because the flood water is not usable. Again, to come to the form of this settlement, which would sort of be able to sort of take in the rush of water that flows around it, what would be the shape or form of that plinth? And from observations, aerial observations, one could understand that the naturally forming sandbanks were comet-shaped. As the water moves around it, as it leaves a tail. And so we sort of arrived at this teardrop kind of a shape in which the center of which is the pond for fresh water. This is what it looks like in the landscape. So a very flat landscape, and this is the kind of plinth that you see. But how did we build it? So it was a self-help and income-generating project. So the villagers whose houses were to be moved, they were the ones who were making the plinth, and they were paid to do this work. So it was income generation as well as self-help. And of course, it was a very interactive process because we had our drawings, but we had to work with them. So this is one of our architects at site, and using very rudimentary means to give layout to this island. and to also to understand local ways of making things. This is when the sort of the central pond is taking shape. Green sort of begins to return, and life returns. So in terms of placement of the houses themselves, we had a plan. We had a kind of a layout which followed the traditional way of having courtyards, sort of interconnected courtyards. People moved from one courtyard to the other, but this was given as a kind of a reference. They did not have to follow it. So what we had was this interactive kind of sessions with the villagers in which we were able to change the layout as we sort of went on. And this is how it sort of looks today. This year we had a very sort of bad flood, and these photographs are from there. So the water just was receding when these photographs were taken. So as you can see, this is the plinth, and the water is sort of going back. And but on the plinth itself, as you can see, it's quite dry, and they can dry their jute. This is jute. They can dry the jute, and sort of life can continue. And the cattle can be brought onto the plinth as well, and be dry as well. But the central pond works, of course, because as you can see, it's all fresh water. They can use this for various purposes. So both this, the first project and this one has to do with climate change. The second one is a cyclone shelter. You have seen some examples by Bashir Bhai here, wonderful examples, which I had the very good opportunity to visit with him, and from which I was able to learn quite a lot. But in 2007, this major cyclone struck Bangladesh, and cyclones, if you know, form in the Bay of Bengal, and then it starts to move inwards. Many times it goes to India or Myanmar, but most of the time, unfortunately, it goes into Bangladesh. This particular cyclone, or super cyclonic storm as it is called, Sidr, it struck Bangladesh in the night of November 15, 2007. It caused death to more than 10,000 people. I understand the official figure is 10,000, but really it was more than 15,000 people, and damages to $1.7 billion. So this is what it looked like, actually, in scale. As you can see, that's Bangladesh and part of India. And this is how it sort of made landfall and sort of moved inwards and dissipated. So as it struck on the midnight of November 15th, and I was in Dhaka, and there we were. And by the next morning, one could hear reports on the radio about what was happening there, the dire situation. And my friends, photographers and journalists who were there, I could call them, and we decided not to be in my air-conditioned car or office or whatever it is. And we thought we could go and see and learn from what was happening. And so we managed to arrive at, myself and 3 other colleagues from the office, 4 of us, we managed to arrive at this place, which is about 250 kilometers from Dhaka, but it took us about 14 hours because some of the bridges were gone. And so we arrived here, and then from here we hired a boat, and we were on the boat for about 4 nights or 5 days. So we moved through this canal here, and then we moved there, and then came back all the way to all these places, then went to all these places. This is the largest mangrove forest in the world, which was a little bit affected, but mostly this is the area where the sort of cyclone struck. So this is what it looked like. So because I'm a photographer, I try to understand this through photography as well. But as you can see, this is a river, and it's like an ocean. You don't see the other side. And if you try to imagine what was happening, the water was moving inland. It moved about 7 meters to above where we were standing. It's at midnight, so the power is out. It's totally dark, and you hear the howling wind, which is at least 220 kilometers in the center. Close to the center, it's 260 kilometers an hour. So you can imagine the trauma and the kind of loss of sense of direction for the people. And then as we were moving, one of my colleagues, he was also making recordings, not like an interview, but just recording the sounds and whatever people were saying. And of course, there was a lot of trauma. And so much of that did not actually make sense. So one of them was, for example, saying that he saw demons in the sky. And then I thought, of course, this is from trauma. So as we moved on, somebody else said we saw more demons and said we saw fire in the sky. And I really couldn't understand. Later on, we realized that the wind was moving so fast, it had caught fire. So you have rain, you have 260 kilometers wind speed, you have fire in the air, and of course, your ground is non-existent. You are in an endless kind of an ocean. So these are some of the photographs from, as you can see, this used to be a forest. So you can see what has happened. And, but it was important for me personally not to take any portraits or from on a facial sort of expression, because it's meaningless. Of course, they're in trauma. This little girl, for example, is looking towards where her house was, which is just vanished. And she's the only survivor of the family. And this man has lost 8 persons from his family, and he was not really talking any sense. This person, for example, the only marker of his house is these ones. So it has just vanished, and you don't see any remnants of it also. It's just gone. And there used to be all trees around here. So because the cyclone moved somewhere here, those got saved, but here it's just plain. It was, of course, when we came back to Dhaka, we couldn't work for a week or more, and we decided as architects, we are not an aid agency, but what we could do was sort of design something based on our experience. So one of the things that we could understand was that this needed to be a marker in the landscape so that the people could very easily get to the shelter during need. Now, the cyclone shelter is needed because the houses that are there in the landscape are thatched houses. They are no match for the power of the cyclone. But there are many shelters in Bangladesh, more than 2,500, many very nice ones done by Bashirul Haq here, which, as I said, I had the chance to visit. But we thought, from our understanding, sort of to try to do a design which sort of addresses some of the issues there. So the idea was to have a very simple cruciform shape, and around which to have a kind of a ramp protecting the building, in which case we automatically have shafts or wells in 4 corners, which could bring in light and ventilation. And also, it was important to protect the main structure from hydraulic pressure, especially during cyclones, because then everything is flying, from branches to parts of buildings to even cows and animals. So this is the basic plan. This would be used as a school during normal times. The ground floor would be used as a clinic. The upper floor would be used as a primary school. And it was important to protect the building, especially the openings of the buildings, through using this ramp kind of a structure. And the glass is then set, not in an ordinary way, but set in deep recesses in the concrete to protect it from breaking, although this is tempered and laminated. So this is how it would be used during normal times, and even the children can use the roof as a playground. But during cyclones, people would, of course, come and fill up. And one important thing was to be able to bring their cattle with them, because this is all they possess. So it was important that they could bring the cattle and bring it up the ramp and take it to the roof to be saved. And the other thing was to have high ceiling so that we could lessen the feeling of claustrophobia as much as possible. These are some impressions of what it is. So the ramp turns as it goes up. This is a model, much like the one, actually this is the very model you have in the exhibition here. So using those photographs and the accounts that we had, unedited versions of those accounts, we made a little kind of a booklet and we tried to raise funds with it. For 5 years, it proved to be futile. And then there was a group from Luxembourg who thought this is a good idea, and they took one of our exhibitions to Luxembourg in order to try to raise funds for a prototype of this project. And so, in fact, the model again that you see here was in Luxembourg, and Nick and Vivian were gracious enough to sort of bring it here again. And I'm happy to say that we could raise funds for one prototype, which is under construction and nearly finishing. And of course, in Bangladesh, it's not like in Switzerland. The construction is quite basic, as you can see. But it's in a very remote area. It's close to the sea. And it's all in concrete. So this is the ground floor that's going up. This is where the windows would be. And this is how it looks now as it is finishing in the landscape. The last project is an art center in northeastern part of Bangladesh, here somewhere. And it is close to, it is on 3 sides is India and mountains. And in this area as well, it's undulating topography. And quite a lot of inland water bodies or estuaries. So very green, very lush kind of a landscape. This is where our site is, and very close to it is a reserve forest. And even in the side, there's a lot of paddy fields and greenery. So this would be built in phases, of course, because it's this large sculpture park where artists from all over would be invited to sort of have their work. For this phase, we are working on 3 sort of components. One is the entry structure, a gallery, and a kind of an artist's camp or residences where artists can come and stay. So the first structure is really a space trap in the sense people can come, but they would not be able to drive through. So they would come and get dropped off and then move around and go into the rest of the campus. So this is more like a vehicular court. This is what it would look like. This is also under construction to be finished in about 6 months. So for this phase, because they want to do this very quickly and they want to have this inaugurated in the middle of next year, so they said, we don't have too much time for the real, the main campus area, but what we need is really a 60 by 80 open space for flexible curating work. And I knew that this would not go in the direction that we would like. So I said, all right, we will do this very quickly. And this is what we drew up. So the 60 by 80 is there, but we have other spaces around it to arrive at this point. So this is basically a kind of a prefab structure around which we have the brick sort of envelope, the skin, and this is the form that sort of results, and in the landscape, also under construction. So all around would be the paddy fields. It's set in the paddy fields. So all local handmade bricks. And what happens is the space in between the box that you saw and the undulating sort of outer wall, we have spaces where there could be installations and sculptures. So spaces, for example, here. So the final component, which is for the residences, we had a kind of a hillock where there was a lot of greenery on one side, but on the other it was quite And then we decided to have the residences here and the dining and other social spaces where there were more trees. So we try to work with units, blocks, not just as a drawing, but sort of try to understand how we could have the spaces sort of more fluid. And so we arrived at this kind of an arrangement, but this is more not, we arrived because of the views sort of from inside and towards the various spaces. So this is the final layout. The basic module is very simple. It's a room and a ensuite bath. And so this is repeated in various ways to sort of create the spaces. This one is in concrete. It sort of takes on the color of the earth, and it's cast in local wood. And so the various blocks sort of kind of curated views out into the landscape. Thank you.